A millionaire returned to his ex-wife's home after 4 years apart, and froze when he saw his 5-year-old daughter, dressed in worn, faded clothes, scrubbing the floor like a maid, while the adult sat back, relaxing in front of the TV. And what he did next left everyone utterly speechless. Alejandro sat in the conference room on the 27th floor, his fountain pen turning silently between his fingers. The Q4 revenue report lay open in front of him, but his eyes had already drifted from the numbers. Alejandro Carter was the founder and CEO of Carter Innovations. On Wall Street, he needed no introduction. A sharp mind in tech, a quiet philanthropist, and above all, a man who had long since left the memories of his past behind. Most recently, his name appeared on Forbes' 40 Under 40 list. His phone buzzed softly. An email, no subject, no sender, just one line. "You need to see this." He tapped it open. The screen lit up with a short clip. 10 seconds, no more. A little girl, hair messy, in a sweater that hung to her knees, was on her hands and knees on a tiled floor, a rag clenched in one hand. She wasn't crying, but with every push of the rag, her shoulders trembled. Her eyes were red, still as frozen water in winter. No adult voices. No one said, "That's enough." No one stopped her. Alejandro lost a breath. His fingertips trembled. He watched it again, a second time, and again because he couldn't believe it. Then he stood, abrupt, decisive. "The meeting's not over, Mr. Carter," his assistant reminded him. But Alejandro was already sliding his phone into his coat pocket. "Prep the jet. I need to leave New York, right now." He looked out the window of the black Lincoln as the city slowly peeled away into bands of evening light, giving way to narrower streets and low-roofed homes, quiet, as if they'd forgotten how to echo time. It had been 8 months since he last came back here. Time had moved fast, through back-to-back meetings, chilled champagne, and million-dollar deals signed over 5-star dinners. Alejandro once believed that success could fill the hollow places inside him. But in the end, the only thing powerful enough to bring him back wasn't a contract. It was a 10-second video of his daughter, Laura, 5 years old, on her knees, cleaning the floor. He hadn't heard her voice in the clip, but her small, shaking hands and tear-reddened eyes had been enough to leave him sitting still for a long, long time. No one said her name. No one told her to stop. The car pulled up in front of 12C. Alejandro opened the door and stepped out, the sound of his leather shoes scraping against the rough cement. The door wasn't locked. He pushed it open. Inside, the flicker from the TV cast a smeared light on the peeling wall. Todd Miller, Becky's current husband, sat with one leg thrown over the other, a beer can in hand, eyes glued to the screen. A man living off unemployment checks and blame. Becky sat beside him, hair matted at the nape, hugging a pillow to her chest. She used to shine like holiday lights when Alejandro was with her. Now she looked like someone stuck in the middle of a scene that was never finished. On the floor, Laura knelt. She was cleaning. Her long sweater nearly touched her knees, the sleeves soaked with soapy water. Her little hand pushed the rag forward in short, tired strokes. No one noticed her. Neither adult flinched when she coughed, dry and shallow from the dust. Alejandro stood still. He said nothing. He just walked toward her. His hand came to rest gently on her shoulder. Laura stopped. Her hand froze. She looked up, big, wet eyes, no surprise in them. "It's me. Daddy's here." She didn't answer, just slowly stood, her head slightly lowered. Alejandro turned, eyes locking on Becky. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" She didn't rise, didn't ask. Her lips pressed into a thin, silent line. Todd chuckled under his breath. "She's just learning to be independent. Don't act like she's never cleaned a floor before." Alejandro stepped forward, leaned down and picked Laura up. She rested her head on his shoulder, her arms wrapping loosely around his neck. As if her body remembered a position her heart hadn't held in a long time. He turned and walked to the door. No one called after him. No one tried to stop him. The old door creaked as it closed behind them, like the end of a sentence no one bothered to finish. The night wind slipped down his collar. Alejandro held his daughter tighter. She still didn't speak, but her breathing had grown steadier. Every step he took was heavy with the weight of the past, but he knew if he didn't keep walking, the road ahead would close forever. And this time, he wouldn't let that happen. Adam's hands on the wheel, his longtime private driver, were as steady as ever, but in the rearview mirror, his eyes kept flicking toward the back seat. Alejandro said nothing. He didn't need to ask. Laura was buckled into the safety seat by the same hands Alejandro couldn't recall using for anything recently except holding files. He fastened the belt, leaning in slightly, close enough to feel her breath. Laura didn't lift her head. She didn't pull away either. Her little legs were tucked in, her small hands gripping the hem of her shirt. The car turned onto the main road. Light from a gas station up ahead washed the inside of the car in a soft yellow glow, casting Laura's silhouette slanted to one side. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice dry, like she hadn't had water all day. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you still remember the song I like?" Alejandro looked up. He didn't have to ask which one. His fingers reached for the touchscreen, scrolling through an old playlist he'd never deleted. A slow guitar intro played. Laura rested her head against the window and closed her eyes. 3 minutes later, her breathing had evened out. Her small shoulders dropped, like she'd set down an invisible backpack. No one spoke for the rest of the drive. There had never been any sign of a child in Alejandro's penthouse, but that night, a small room in the far left corner was cleaned and made ready. Fresh linens, a stuffed rabbit he'd once bought but never sent, a framed photo placed on the desk. Laura, at 3 years old, wearing a bear costume, mouth wide with laughter, hugging a pizza with both hands. Alejandro didn't sleep. He sat at the dining table, opened his laptop, and played the video again. Not to confirm his emotions. This time, he was looking for a trace. He rewound and paused, rewound again. The TV flickered in rhythm. Laura wiped her hands on her shirt. On the table, something gleamed, angled, blurry, out of focus. Not from a standard camera. The angle was low, steady, unmoving. He paused the clip at the 8-second mark, zoomed in on the lower left corner. A faint shape appeared, like the edge of a picture frame, or maybe a small fixed camera. A child couldn't have set up a camera like that, and the adults in the room seemed completely unaware of its presence. Alejandro frowned. He saved the frame and sent it to David, his personal attorney, with a note. "Need someone to trace the source of this clip. Urgent." The next morning, he was woken by the soft patter of small feet on the hardwood floor. Laura stood by the kitchen doorway, one hand clutching the button on her pajama top. Her eyes were puffy, her hair still messy, but it looked freshly washed. She stared at the pancake sizzling in the skillet. "Can I help?" she asked. Not loudly, but clearly. Alejandro didn't answer right away. He handed her a plate and pointed to the pile of strawberries he had just rinsed. "Make a smiley face with the berries. Leave space for the mouth." Laura sat down, her fingers gently touching each berry like she was arranging her own little world. For a few minutes, the kitchen held only the sounds of oil crackling, a spoon tapping a plate, and quiet breathing. Alejandro didn't know where to start, but he remembered the feeling. It was like learning how to walk beside someone small for the first time. Not leading, not pushing, just walking next to them. When Laura finished the pancake face, She pushed the plate toward him. "Looks like you," she said. "The mouth is straight too." Alejandro chuckled, softly, a sound that surprised even him. That evening, he got a message from David. No original metadata, videos been lightly edited, most likely shot from a fixed device, not a phone. Alejandro sat alone in his study, facing the screen in silence. He looked at the photo of Laura with Becky, taken last year at preschool. The little girl had hugged her mom, smiling wide, dimples clear. But in that photo, Todd stood beside them, his hand resting on Laura's shoulder, as if it belonged there. He asked himself, who recorded it? Who sent it? And why? He knew this wasn't just a case of a struggling mum with poor parenting skills. It was a warning, or a trap, and he had just walked into it. Alejandro stayed at the desk late into the night, watching the video again, not just through the heart of a father, but with the eyes of a man beginning to suspect that someone was watching his daughter. And it couldn't have been by accident. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, as if reminding them that time was passing. Alejandro sat still, fingers interlocked, occasionally glancing at the frosted glass door across from him, where David Ross was rearranging files on his desk. David, his longtime friend and the most trusted attorney Alejandro knew, had handled dozens of complicated financial cases. But this time was different. This wasn't covered by any contract. This was personal, and it was slowly unraveling the threads of calm that had always bound their trust. "Alejandro, are you sure you want to go through with this?" David looked up, his voice calm but clear. Petitioning for temporary custody is a big step, and with what we have right now, everything's still pretty fragile. "I can't let Laura go back there like nothing ever happened," Alejandro replied. "I need to make sure she's safe, and I need to know who was behind that video and why." David gave a small nod, then picked up a pen and scribbled a few lines into his notebook. He said nothing more, letting Alejandro sit with his thoughts. "I'll have Rachel trace where that video originated, where it was sent from, what kind of device was used. I'll talk to Judge Clark about the possibility of filing for temporary custody of Laura," David said, then paused. "But Alejandro, once we step into this, there's no stepping back." Alejandro nodded. "I've made up my mind," he said, his voice low but steady. Margaret Carter was sitting in the kitchen, peeling apples. A widow who had lived alone for years, she was stern, but measured in how she spoke. Her relationship with Alejandro was often tense, not from a lack of love, but because she never sugarcoated anything. When Alejandro entered, she didn't look up. She just kept peeling, as if nothing had changed. "Can I have a moment of your time, Mom?" he asked gently. 4 minutes, if you're bringing good news." Alejandro pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his gaze falling to the table. "I'm filing for custody of Laura." Margaret paused. The blade halted mid-peel, the apple's skin broke and fell into the dish. She set the knife down, wiped her hands with a napkin, and looked at her son. "You should have done that 3 years ago. Now." She exhaled quietly. "Maybe it's not too late. But if you're going to do this, you have to follow it through." Alejandro said nothing. "She needs a real adult by her side. If that's going to be you, then show her you're not just coming back out of guilt." He nodded, this time slowly, but with certainty. Rachel King, Alejandro's young legal assistant, was calm and deliberate by nature. She started at Laura's preschool, where she met Ms. Thompson, the middle-aged teacher with thoughtful eyes and a patient way of speaking. Laura's a sweet girl, but quiet. She often stares out the window. Once, I heard her tell another child, "I'm not allowed to sing at home." I thought it was just something kids say. But now, I'm not so sure. Rachel quietly jotted that down, thanked her, and left the school. Her next stop was Dr. Mitchell's clinic, Laura's pediatrician for the past 2 years. He reviewed the file and said, "Recently, Laura's been coming in without her father. She barely spoke during those visits. What struck me was her eyes, avoiding contact, guarded. But it wasn't enough to file a report. Joe Palmer, the owner of the little grocery store at the end of the street, recognized Laura the moment he saw the photo. She used to stop by for cookies, counted every penny. One time I asked, "Why didn't your mum come with you?" She just shook her head and whispered, "Mum's busy sleeping at home." Late that night, as the hallway lights dimmed one by one, Rachel returned to the office. She placed the freshly printed files on David's desk, then looked over at Alejandro, still sitting silently nearby. "We have some details," she said, "but it's not enough to see the full picture yet." Alejandro looked up. "What about Laura's friends? Maybe they can tell us something more." Rachel nodded. "I'll try." The next day, Rachel went to Laura's classroom. Chloe, the curly-haired girl holding a box of crayons, was the first to speak. "Laura told me that at home she's not allowed to sing. Her stepdad says, 'Good girls, don't make noise.'" Rachel didn't ask further. She just wrote it down exactly as it was said, and in her heart, the pieces started to fall into place. That night, Alejandro sat with Laura at the dinner table. The meal was chicken soup, but she barely touched her spoon. Alejandro refilled her glass of water, then spoke slowly. "Tomorrow, you'll go visit Mom for a little while. I'll wait outside, but if something makes you sad, just tell me. Or if you don't want to talk, just give me this jacket." He handed her the little coat. Sewn neatly into the hem was a small, child-safe recording device. Laura didn't ask any questions. She looked at the jacket, then gave a faint nod. It wasn't permission. It was trust, something no child should learn to give so early. But tonight, under the soft yellow kitchen light, Alejandro knew this was the first step toward the truth. And the truth could wait no longer. Tomorrow, that little coat would carry the voice of a child too young for words. But Alejandro had no idea yet that what he was about to hear wouldn't just be about Laura. It would open the door to another secret, one deeper, older, and far harder to face. Becky opened the door when the bell rang for the second time. Her eyes passed over Alejandro without stopping, then dropped to Lily. "Come in, sweetheart." There was no hug, no smile. Lily stepped over the threshold as if entering a stranger's house. Alejandro gave Becky a slight nod and turned to leave. Todd wasn't home. Becky led Lily into the kitchen. She'd already set out a plate of eggs and mashed potatoes, trying to sound cheerful. "Eat up, honey. I made your favorite." Lily shook her head. "I'm not hungry. I miss Daddy's house." The room fell silent. A long breath. Becky didn't reply. She just sat down across from her, worry clouding her eyes. Beneath the hem of Lily's shirt, the small recorder picked up the soft clink of a spoon on the plate, the gentle scrape of a chair moving. Then Becky's voice, a broken whisper. "If you keep this up, they're going to take you away from me." Night came slow. Light from the hallway spilled through the crack in the door. Lily fell asleep early. Becky sat in the living room, blanket wrapped around her, eyes drifting to the clock now and then. The front door lock turned with a soft click. Todd was home. He tossed his keys onto the table, yanked open the fridge, and chugged a can of beer. Seeing Becky still there, his expression darkened. "Playing happy family again. Your ex takes the kid out for the day and drops her off like nothing happened, and you just act like it's all fine." Becky stood. "Todd, not tonight. I'm really tired." "I'm tired too, Becky. That kid, she walks through this house like a ghost. Doesn't talk, doesn't look at me. You think I want to live like this?" "She's my daughter. And please, don't talk about her like that. She's his daughter." "Proof of everything you can't let go of," Todd said, his voice rising. "But if I let her go, I lose everything. You think they'll just leave me be? A guy who's been to juvie. No family, no kid in the house. How long do you think I'll keep this job?" Becky stiffened. "What are you saying, Todd?" "I'm saying nobody's taking her from me. Not because I need her, but because if she goes, everything I've built falls apart. My past, my future." Glass shattered. A tumbler flew from Todd's hand, slammed against the wall, shards scattered across the floor. "No one's taking her from me," he roared, voice shaking, whether from rage or fear. It was hard to tell. The next morning, Alejandro replayed the recording. Every voice, every sound came through sharp and clear, clearer than the night before. He leaned back in his chair but couldn't stay still for long. His fists clenched, tendons taut, as if everything he couldn't yet say had gathered at the tips of his fingers, waiting for release. This wasn't about parenting anymore. This was danger, real and present. Laura, only 5, had no words to explain, no strength to fight back. And she was living in the middle of it, every day, every night. A light drizzle fell that morning. A small cafe sat tucked behind an intersection, its yellow lights blurring softly against the glass windows. Inside, Steve, the private investigator Alejandro had hired, sat at a table near the window, holding a cup of unsweetened black coffee. He was focused on a folder of documents under the dim light, his reading glasses slightly slipping down the bridge of his nose. Outside, a child passed by with their mother. The kid's raincoat had a tear along the side. Steve watched for a moment, then took out his phone. "We've got our first lead," he said curtly to Alejandro, "and it's not light." Todd Miller, the man currently living with Becky, had a past littered with shadows. Steve summarized the findings. In 2012, Todd was investigated for scamming a woman online. The woman later dropped the charges after receiving a settlement. No one knows where the money came from. He once coerced a former girlfriend into co-signing a credit card account. A few months later, she filed for personal bankruptcy. Todd's name disappeared from all associated documents. Worse still, in 2016, a girlfriend named Denise died by suicide, sleeping pills. The case was closed with no evidence of foul play, but the forensic report revealed that, in her final week, Denise had been cut off from communication and had lost all control over her personal finances. Steve also sent over a video clip, security footage from a bar, showing Todd grabbing a woman's wrist, forcing her into a chair, and speaking through clenched teeth. There were no official complaints, but something in the woman's eyes made Alejandro's heart go cold. Steve had also looked into Becky Wilson. She had visited a mental health clinic 4 times after her divorce. Medical notes mentioned mild depression and postpartum panic episodes, though her treatment had been inconsistent. A longtime friend, Tina, shared, "Becky once told me, I don't even know if I'm a mother anymore or just the housemaid." That sentence, it chilled me. Steve concluded, Becky wasn't malicious, but she was caught in a subtle web of control, one with Todd at its center. One afternoon, Alejandro went to Becky's house under the pretense of asking for Laura's school records. The front door was unlocked. He knocked gently. No answer. From inside, he heard the soft shuffle of little footsteps, followed by something hitting the floor, like a glass cup nudged off balance. He didn't step in. Standing at the threshold, he called out quietly, "Becky?" Silence for a few seconds. Then, a child's voice responded, small and hesitant. "Mum, If I'm good, can I stay? Can I not be moved away again? Alejandro froze. No child comes up with a question like that, unless they've heard someone else worry about it right in front of them. Later, under the dim amber light of Alejandro's living room, Steve placed a small recorder on the wooden table and pressed play. A voice came on, hoarse and slightly trembling. It was the voice of an older woman, likely used to speaking slowly and carefully. My name is Dorothy. I live in the unit to the left. I don't usually get involved in other people's business, but there are things you just can't ignore. A short pause, like she was recalling something. I once saw the little girl, Laura, standing out on the balcony. No coat, nothing warm, just a thin set of pajamas in the cold. She just stood there, still, didn't cry, didn't call for her mother, just stared down at the street like she was waiting for someone. Dorothy cleared her throat softly, then continued, her voice slower and more deliberate. One time, I heard loud banging on the door. A man's voice. Must have been Todd's. I couldn't make out the words, but after that, silence. Just pure, heavy silence. For days, no one came out of that apartment. No lights on at night. No sound. The recording ended with a long sigh. Steve shut off the device. No one spoke. Alejandro just stared at it, as if the final words were still echoing in his ears. She didn't cry, just stood there, like she was waiting for someone to come get her. Rachel King, the assistant attorney, pieced it all together. She drew a timeline, marking red dots where patterns of control repeated. Laura shows no signs of physical abuse, Rachel said, but she's living under a kind of silent discipline, what we'd call emotional neglect. Becky doesn't step in, because she's living under it too. Watch him more closely. Don't let him know. Under the soft glow of Laura's lamp, Alejandro sat beside his daughter without saying a word. She was coloring a light blue umbrella, her pencil smudging slightly at the tip. He watched her quietly, then gently placed a hand on her head, stroking her hair. His voice was deep, steady. You won't have to ask that question ever again. Laura didn't look up, but her coloring slowed, as if she'd heard and understood. That question, if I'm good, can I go back to my old home forever? Still circled Alejandro's mind. It nestled deep into the softest part of him, like a quiet reminder. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. He stood, took out his phone, and dialed David. When he spoke, his voice no longer belonged to a father chasing justice. It was the voice of a man who had made a decision and would not turn back. Get ready. We're not asking for temporary custody anymore. I want full custody, and I'm ready to go to court. He hung up, opened his laptop, and typed a quick message. No pleasantries, no explanation. 2. Steve, I need you to watch Todd more closely. Don't let him know. He hit send. His hand trembled slightly, but his gaze did not. In the living room, the soft, steady scratch of crayon on paper continued, like a small heartbeat slowly finding its rhythm again. A thin veil of mist, light as smoke, drifted quietly down onto Maplewood Street. The drizzle wasn't heavy enough to soak through a coat, but it left the sidewalks cold and damp. Alejandro parked half a block from Becky's old apartment. Water streaks clung unevenly to the car windows. He shut off the engine, but didn't get out. He sat there still, eyes fixed on the familiar apartment, the one that had once been Laura's first home. It had been nearly a week since he and David filed for temporary custody, along with a petition requesting an official wellness check on Laura's current living conditions. The court had acted quickly, not just because of the thick file of documentation they'd submitted, but also due to the urgent recommendation from social worker Karen Blake. And today, as part of the process, Karen had been assigned to conduct an on-site inspection. With her was Officer James Taylor, a neighborhood cop designated to ensure objectivity and safety for everyone involved. Right on schedule, a silver sedan pulled up at the end of the alley. Karen stepped out first, her grey raincoat hanging to her knees, clutching a waterproof case of documents. Officer Taylor followed, not in uniform, but in a thick indigo coat. He could have passed for a neighbor, if not for his eyes, alert, assessing. Alejandro took a few steps forward, about to speak, but Karen caught his gaze and shook her head gently. Her voice was calm, but firm. "We'll report back afterward. Please don't come in." They walked through the door Alejandro had once carried Laura out of, where he'd seen his daughter's silence speak louder than any explanation. The lock on that door still hadn't been changed. Alejandro's hands clenched inside his jacket pockets. Becky answered the door. No makeup, hair tied back hastily. Her eyes were tired, but she didn't look away. Todd appeared from the kitchen in a crisp white shirt, wearing a smile so polite it felt unnatural. "We've prepared her medical records and a daily routine log." The apartment looked cleaner than before, but a faint musty smell still lingered. Laura sat on the sofa, holding an old stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were locked on nothing in particular. Karen began with basic questions: how Laura had been eating, whether she'd been sick recently, what time she went to bed. Todd answered quickly, with a level of detail that felt rehearsed. Becky chimed in occasionally, softly, disjointedly, barely participating. Officer Taylor moved slowly through the apartment. He crouched beside a wall and brushed his fingers over a patch of fresh paint where old scratches still faintly showed beneath. Next to the sofa, a dark brown stain marked the floor. Not recent enough to comment on, but impossible to ignore. Karen lowered herself beside Laura, eye level. She placed a box of crayons and a blank sheet of paper on the small table in front of the girl. "What do you like drawing most?" Laura picked a pale blue crayon. She drew slowly, a small figure lying on the floor beside a rectangle that looked like a television. No sun, no trees, no flowers. Karen looked at the drawing, then asked gently, "Do you have your own room?" Laura glanced at her mother. Then she lowered her head and whispered, "I sleep on the floor, because Mummy says my dreams are too loud." Karen didn't react. She just quietly made a note in her pad. A small mark beneath a dense row of handwriting. As the conversation shifted to daily routines, Todd started interrupting more. He answered even questions not directed at him. His voice rose at times, edging out Becky's. Officer Taylor kept writing, eyes never leaving Todd's face. Becky clasped her hands together, then finally spoke up, clearer than before. "What exactly are you accusing us of? If this is an investigation, just say so." Karen didn't respond directly. She closed her notebook and replied evenly, "This is a standard procedure per court order. We're just documenting the current conditions." Outside, Karen walked straight to Alejandro's car. She removed her glasses, wiped the water from them, then looked him in the eye. The apartment's clean, but the air in there, it doesn't feel real. The girl's not free to speak, and that man, he controls everything, even the space. Alejandro exhaled, voice low. "Do we have enough?" Karen hesitated, showing uncertainty for the first time. "Not enough for the records. But I believe you're telling the truth, and I believe Laura. She's asking for help, in the only language a child has." That night, Alejandro returned home. Laura was asleep on the sofa, still wrapped in her thin jacket. The stuffed rabbit had slipped from her arms, lying on its side on the floor. He opened his laptop and connected to a small recording device hidden in the hem of her coat. A new file appeared. He hit play. Becky's tired voice came first. "You promised you wouldn't yell, Todd." Then Todd's voice, low and irritable. "You're always taking her side. Why don't you just send her back already?" A loud thud. Silence for a few seconds. Then footsteps, fading out of the room. Alejandro stood up sharply, his hand pressed to the table, eyes locked on the screen. This wasn't a theory anymore. This was real danger. He picked up the phone and called David. "I don't need more evidence. I need a protective order. Tonight." It was a chilly afternoon. Damp maple leaves dotted the brick path. The gate of the preschool creaked open, and clusters of children spilled out onto the yard, chattering, their jackets askew, laughter tumbling out in bursts. Alejandro stood by the fence, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the last classroom at the end of the corridor. From across the playground, a young woman approached, holding the hand of a little girl with brown hair and bright, slightly shy eyes. They stopped in front of Alejandro. The woman spoke softly, a hint of hesitation in her voice. "You're Laura's dad, right?" "I'm Chloe's mother." Alejandro gave a quiet nod. She reached into her bag and pulled out a phone. On the screen was a familiar video. Flickering light. Laura bent down, wiping the floor. Chloe recorded it while she was playing behind the school. When we got home, she asked me, "Why is Laura cleaning the floor by herself, Mummy? Why isn't anyone helping her?" I didn't know how to answer. So after thinking it over for a long time, I decided to send you the clip. At the time, I didn't know who you were, just saw Laura's name in an old contact list from the preschool. I sent it because I thought, if you were someone close to her, maybe you should know. I didn't realize it would matter this much. Chloe stood half hidden behind her mother, only part of her face showing. Alejandro knelt slightly, his gaze softening. "You did the right thing. Because of you, the grown-ups had to take a closer look at everything. Thank you, Chloe." The little girl hesitated, then mumbled, "I just saw Laura cleaning the floor, and no one was helping her. I thought if that were me, I'd feel really sad." Alejandro didn't answer right away. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded his thanks. Chloe nodded back, almost imperceptibly. Then, as if a weight had been lifted, she grabbed her mother's hand and ran toward the parking lot. Later that evening, Alejandro sat in his car near the school. The radio was on low, but he wasn't listening. The dismissal bell rang. The classroom door opened. Laura appeared, dragging an oversized backpack, walking slowly, her eyes scanning the crowd for something familiar. When she spotted Alejandro, she froze. 1 second of silence. Then she suddenly bolted toward him. "Daddy!" Alejandro knelt, arms wide open. Laura threw her arms around his neck and held on tight, saying nothing. Her breath still smelled faintly of milk. He held her longer than usual. In that moment, he understood. This wasn't just about custody. It was about protecting both of them from something they no longer had the words to name. And Becky, she shouldn't be left in that darkness either. That night, Alejandro went to the clinic where Becky had once received counseling. The hallway was quiet. The scent of disinfectant lingered faintly. He waited in silence until he was invited into the office of Dr. Mitchell, the psychologist who had once overseen Becky's case after the divorce. Alejandro sat down across from him and got straight to the point. "I'm not here to accuse or blame anyone. I just have one question." Dr. Mitchell stayed still, his hands resting lightly on the desk. "If I want to help her heal, from the inside somehow, is that even possible?" The doctor studied him for a moment. There was no skepticism in his eyes, only careful thought. "Healing doesn't come from someone else's effort, but if you can be there, not walk away, Not push, just be steady, like someone waiting for spring after the longest winter. Then yes, there's still a chance. Alejandro gave a small nod. He didn't know where that path would lead, but this time, he wouldn't give up halfway. Late that night, in their small living room, Laura sat on the rug. She held a crayon and drew quietly on a blank sheet of paper. No one told her to draw. No one asked. When Alejandro came over, she held up the picture. A house. 2 grown-ups standing on either side. A small child in the middle, holding both their hands. All the faces had eyes. No one was on the floor. No one looked down. Alejandro looked at it for a long time, and for the first time, he wasn't afraid. That picture was her voice, and it was the answer he had been looking for. None of the 3, Alejandro, Becky, or even Laura, ever imagined their story would end up in a courtroom. But sometimes, all it takes is a 10-second video, a whisper from a 5-year-old, and a silence that lingers too long for everything to unravel. Alejandro had never intended to challenge custody out of anger. 4 years ago, the tech company he founded teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. He chose to protect the one asset he believed he could leave his daughter: financial security. He wasn't good at living 2 lives. The marriage cracked, then crumbled. Like so many others, when people forget that love too needs tending, like a child. Becky was granted custody. Alejandro agreed. No legal battle. He still sent birthday gifts, still paid child support on time. But Laura, the quiet girl who hid behind curtains, slowly faded from his world, until the clip surfaced. The hearing was held on a damp morning. The courtroom was small, dimly lit, the smell of old wood mixing with the soft rustle of turning pages. Alejandro arrived early, sat still, hands clasped over his chest, eyes fixed ahead. Rachel King, the young attorney David Ross had assigned, sat beside him, carefully organizing each document. Neither spoke much. Becky walked in later, slowly. She wore no makeup, an old wool coat, her hair tied loosely back. Beside her was Mark Bennett, the attorney Todd had hired. The seat to his right was empty. Todd hadn't shown. Becky didn't look toward Alejandro. Her eyes stayed on the floor. The once proud line of her shoulders now slumped. The hearing began. Mark Bennett spoke first. "Your Honor, Mr. Carter has been largely absent from his daughter's life for nearly 4 years. Ms. Wilson, though not wealthy nor flawless, has raised the girl alone, without legal infractions or abusive behavior. Mr. Carter's sudden request for custody, based solely on a brief video clip, we believe, is misguided." He didn't raise his voice, but every word landed like a nail. Below, Becky lowered her head even more. Rachel stood. She didn't rebut right away. She began with a story. "I don't deny that Ms. Wilson was present during the years Alejandro was gone. But presence doesn't always mean safety. We are not here today to assign blame, but to bring forth a truth. A 5-year-old girl named Laura is living in an environment of control, without a voice, and retreating into herself in a way no child ever should." Rachel laid out the evidence, step by step. The video Chloe recorded from the classroom window, the audio hidden in Laura's shirt, testimony from her teacher Ms. Thompson, Dr. Mitchell, the grocer Joe Palmer, and finally, the report from Karen Blake, an independent social worker. Karen took the stand. Her voice was clear, steady. "I spoke with Laura privately. When I asked her what she liked most, she drew a person lying on the floor next to a television. No mouth. Children don't lie in their drawings. I don't believe it was a game. I believe it was a cry." Alejandro didn't look at Becky, but he knew that, across the room, she was feeling every word tear through the part of her that was still a mother. She had once loved her daughter, loved her enough to stay, even when life with Todd became a string of weariness. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes, it's the very thing that makes someone endure a prison without bars. Judge Clark, a man in his 60s with deep-set eyes and few words, sat silent longer than expected. Finally, he spoke. "The past informs us, but it's the present the court must see. Based on verified evidence, I grant temporary custody to Mr. Alejandro Carter. Ms. Wilson will retain visitation rights under supervision. She is also strongly encouraged to begin psychological counseling should she wish to be reconsidered for long-term custody." No one applauded. Becky didn't lift her head. Her shoulders trembled. Whether from grief or relief, it was hard to tell. Rachel closed her file and let out a breath, like someone finally exhaling a heartbeat held too long. Outside the courthouse, Becky walked quickly. But when Alejandro passed silently by, she suddenly stopped. She didn't turn around. She just said, "Thank you for letting her see me with the clearest eyes possible." Alejandro didn't reply. He only nodded, like a man nodding to his own pain. That afternoon, Frank stayed with Laura at home. When Alejandro opened the door, she ran to him. No questions. She just wrapped her arms around him. For the first time, Alejandro felt that the silence in her embrace wasn't a reproach, but a forgiveness. That night, he opened his laptop and drafted an email to Dr. Mitchell, the one who had treated Laura, and the only person Becky had trusted all these years. "I didn't want to win. I just wanted Becky to be seen as a human being and to be helped. I'm not going anywhere, but I can't walk with her unless someone's guiding her." The final line was typed after a long pause. "I need you to walk with her." Because I still believe that being a father doesn't mean removing the mother from a child's life. Laura moved in with Alejandro on a quiet autumn morning when the sun was still soft and the leaves hadn't yet begun to turn. She sat quietly in the back seat, holding a stuffed rabbit in one hand, the handle of a small pink suitcase in the other. Alejandro didn't say much during the drive. He just played one of Laura's favorite instrumental tracks, keeping the car at a slow, steady pace. Like the breathing of a father and daughter both trying to settle into something unfamiliar. The two-story house at the end of the calm street, where Laura would now live, had been under renovation for weeks. Her room was painted a soft yellow, the color she'd picked when asked. Not a loud, glaring yellow, but something gentler, like beaten egg whites brushed thinly across the walls. On one wall, a mural of a forest stretched wide, with deer, squirrels, and an owl dozing on a branch. Alejandro had hired an artist to paint it specially because he wanted Laura to feel this was her space, not just another kid's room. That first night, after Laura brushed her teeth and climbed into bed, Alejandro sat down on the edge of the mattress. He didn't bring a storybook like he usually did. Instead, he spoke in a hush. "When I was your age," he said, "I hated memorizing the times tables. Every time math class came around, I'd fake a stomachache to get out of it. But one day, I got caught and had to stand in the corner for not knowing my lesson. That night, I wrote a letter to my teacher to say I was sorry. Not because I was scared, but because I was ashamed. And she forgave me. She said, 'Anyone who can admit they're wrong has it in them to make it right.'" Laura was quiet for a moment. Then she giggled. The sound floated lightly through her new room, and for the first time in many months, Alejandro felt something ease inside him. He didn't need much, just that laugh. It was enough. Late Saturday afternoon, the scent of cinnamon and warm butter drifted through the kitchen like an old tune. Alejandro was carefully flipping the last round of dough, while Frank, the longtime housekeeper, washed the final stack of dishes in the sink. The evening settled gently, like the last breath of the day. Alejandro's kitchen was filled with the smell of cinnamon and baked apples. Frank was drying the last of the plates when the gate bell rang, a soft ding, but sharp enough to pause the air in the room. "I'll get it," Frank said, calm as ever, like a man used to unannounced moments. He stepped out, dish towel still draped loosely over his shoulder. Standing at the gate was Becky. Her grey coat was worn, one sleeve slightly crooked, and her low shoes were speckled with dried mud from last night's rain. No makeup, no purse, not a single trace of careful planning. But she stood straight, hands gently clasped in front of her, carrying the look of someone not here to apologize, not here to demand. Just someone trying to find her way back to herself. From the kitchen window, Alejandro looked out. He set the dish towel down and was about to step away when Margaret, his mother, untied her apron and walked out to the front yard. She didn't rush, nor did she hesitate. Her steps were steady, the kind of pace a person learns after living long enough to understand that some conversations need to begin in silence. Margaret didn't ask why Becky had come. She didn't extend a hand to invite her in. She stopped, keeping a distance close enough to see Becky's eyes, already tinged red. Her voice was neither sharp nor soft, but each word settled in the air like something steeped long in experience. If you're here not out of fear or obligation, then let your heart knock, not your hand. Becky bowed her head slightly. It wasn't clear if she was nodding or simply couldn't lift her gaze, her chest too tight with words that hadn't found their way out. She didn't move forward. Margaret said nothing more. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving the gate ajar. Not locked, not wide open, just enough space for the right moment and the right choice. Becky stood still beside the white wooden fence. Her hand rested on the top rail, not gripping it, but not letting go either. She looked up, her gaze landing on a second-story window where warm yellow light spilled across a soft, sun-colored wall. Inside, Laura was sitting cross-legged on a shaggy rug. She was lining up stuffed animals in a neat row, like a tiny classroom. Alejandro sat across from her, holding a plush panda, speaking in a silly, exaggerated voice. "Miss Teacher, the panda's sick today. Can he get the day off?" Laura burst into giggles, tipping sideways as she clutched her belly, then glanced toward the window. Her face relaxed, like a damp cloth wrung free of fear. That smile, light, effortless, and real. Becky hadn't seen it like this before. Not this much. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. In that moment, Becky just stood still, letting the light fall across her shoulders as if it belonged there. She didn't step inside, but she was no longer outside. That night, Becky rode home on the late bus. The wind slipped through the old glass pane, making her hair lift gently. She opened her phone, typed a message, then deleted it. In the end, she placed her hand on her belly and closed her eyes. It wasn't for Laura anymore. For the first time, she wanted to heal, not to keep someone else, but to keep herself. And in a yellow-painted room across the city, Laura was dusting a framed picture, one she'd painted. 3 people, with brushes, not bare hands. The sound of her laughter floated out like a wordless song. Becky placed her hand on the fence again, not grasping, just touching. And in that moment, all the things she'd feared, losing her child, being judged, missing her chance, dissolved like mist. Because Laura could still laugh like a child, and because Becky, though still outside, was allowed to see it. The tears came, not fast, not trembling. Becky didn't wipe them away. For the first time in months, she let them fall, no longer afraid of appearing fragile. She stepped away from the fence, only after Laura's light went out. Becky walked the stone path that curved past the small park near Alejandro's house. The early autumn air was cool, but not sharp, and in her chest, it no longer stung. She sat down on the stone bench by the fountain. The park lights caught the sleeve of her sweater, revealing a frayed thread worn thin with time. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. A missed call from the therapist she once promised she'd go back to. Becky looked at the screen. Her finger hovered over the callback icon. In her mind, Laura was still there, smiling, lifting the stuffed bunny, nodding when Alejandro asked, "You want some apple pie?" When the doctor's voice came through the line, Becky simply said, "I think I'm really ready this time. We can keep going." Alejandro never knew Becky had stood outside the fence that evening. He didn't know she had called the therapist back. But that night, after tucking Laura into bed, he opened her bedroom window and looked out. The wind carried the warm scent of cinnamon from the pie, still cooling on the counter. The park lights spilled down onto the street. Alejandro rested his forehead against the window frame, thinking of Becky, of some journey she was on, one he couldn't walk with her. But he could wait, just outside the door. He whispered, "We all need a yellow room in our lives, not to live in, but to believe there's still a place we can return to." In her sleep, Laura turned over. The bunny slipped from her hand. Alejandro gently picked it up and laid it back in her arms. That night, no one cried. But somehow they all felt just a little bit lighter. On Laura's first morning back at school, the sky was overcast. Alejandro walked her to the car, unrushed. On the way, he played an old instrumental tune. Laura didn't say a word, but her small hand clung tightly to the strap of her blue backpack. Her face wasn't sad, just quiet, as if she were about to step into a new world, one where she somehow knew. This time, things would be different. At home, Frank was reorganizing the bookshelf. Margaret was baking banana bread. The house no longer buzzed with the energy it had when Laura first arrived, but the quiet wasn't gloomy. It felt settled, a new kind of normal, unforced, unspoken, just small rhythms falling back into place. In the kitchen, filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and bananas, no one mentioned yesterday or tomorrow. But every gesture, every glance, held the same quiet truth. They were trying to hold on to something precious. Becky had started formal therapy. Her therapist, a middle-aged woman named Grace, didn't set any timelines. She simply asked, "How are you feeling today?" At that first session, Becky said very little. Her hands were folded in her lap, eyes drifting often to the curtain instead of meeting Grace's. But by the third visit, she began to open up, about the night Laura had a fever, and she'd sat crying on the bathroom floor, unsure who to call. She spoke of the times Todd got angry, breaking things, then soothing her like nothing had happened. She described what it felt like to be lost inside her own home, where every footstep made her flinch. And at the end of the session, Dr. Grace gently rested her hand on the file and simply said, "You survived. Now learn how to live." Becky broke down in tears. But this time, they were real, not for anyone else, not to invite pity. For the first time, she saw herself not through the lens of guilt or fear. Not long after the first hearing, Todd was sued by an ex-girlfriend named Marissa. She had lived with him 2 years before Becky did. The lawsuit reopened old files, controlling behavior, financial deception, emotional threats. Marissa wasn't silent anymore. She filed directly with the state court, attaching journal entries, photos, and saved messages. Steve, the investigator, handed over evidence to the police, witness statements, recordings, even video from a bar. Eventually, Todd was summoned. This time, Becky wasn't pulled into it. No one questioned her. No one blamed her. She stood apart and watched the past unfold, no longer a weight she had to carry. She was simply a witness. And somehow, that alone began to heal something inside her. Michael said nothing about love or getting back together. There were no rings, no flowers. He understood. What Becky needed wasn't a promise. It was time to become the mother she once believed she couldn't be. He didn't want her to feel like he was making amends or placing another burden on her shoulders. They spoke when they needed to, brief, practical exchanges over coffee or on the porch while Laura played nearby. School drop-offs, piano lessons, the sandwiches Laura liked this month and the ones she suddenly didn't. No unnecessary words, just enough to keep the rhythm going. Becky came every Saturday afternoon, always around 2. She never stayed more than an hour. Sometimes she brought a small gift, a book, a scarf, once a jar of strawberry jam she said she made herself, though Alejandro suspected she bought it at the market and just needed a reason to offer something. She never lingered. When it was time to go, Laura would press her small arms around Becky's waist without being asked. And each time, Becky would hold her tight, then turn quickly toward the car, wiping her eyes with the edge of her sleeve before the door closed. But she didn't hide it anymore. The tears weren't a sign of shame now. They didn't come from the same place they used to, the one that said she'd failed or didn't deserve this moment. They came like rain after a long, dry season, quiet, unhurried, necessary. Each tear a loosening, a breath, a first small step towards something she hadn't let herself hope for in a long time. Trust. Not in Alejandro, not even in Laura, but in herself. She was learning, little by little, to believe she could show up without undoing everything, that she could love without breaking what was finally beginning to mend. Sometimes, Margaret came out to open the gate. She didn't say much, but she always left the kitchen door open, like a quiet message. There's always room for kindness. It was a mild, sunny Sunday. Michael invited Becky and Laura for a walk in the park near their home. No one brought a camera. Laura wore a denim dress and carried a little fox-shaped backpack. Michael held the water bottle. Becky brought a sun hat. They walked, side by side. No holding hands, no forced smiles. Every now and then, Laura ran ahead, then circled back, slipping her hand into her father's, then her mother's, as if to make sure no one got left behind. Becky smiled. Michael gave a small nod. No one spoke of the past. No one mentioned the hurt. But in every step, every touch, there was a long journey quietly coming to a close. And in that moment, no one felt they were going back, only moving forward. That night, Laura sat alone in her room, gently dusting off a crayon drawing she had made of the three of them. She used a small brush, her hand light and careful, leaving no marks. The colors were uneven, some smudged with the sweat from her fingers, some shimmering faintly with metallic shine. She didn't know if the drawing was beautiful. She only knew she didn't want it covered in dust. Alejandro stood outside the door, watching. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. The only sound was the brush sweeping softly across the paper, barely audible. Like a quiet reminder. Lily doesn't scrub the floor anymore. She's brushing dust off a drawing of the three of them, with a painter's brush, not her bare hands. Sometimes the things that change our lives don't arrive with a loud bang. They slip in quietly through small details. An unlocked gate, a gentle word left unforced, or simply the way a child looks toward a window. The story of Alejandro, Becky, and Laura isn't just about custody. It's about the journey of learning to face hard truths, to listen with an open heart, and to keep moving forward. No one comes out exactly the same, but anyone can take a step towards something better. What do you think of Alejandro's decision? And have you ever had a moment, small as it was, that changed how you saw someone you love? I know each of us carries our own story. If you're tired, I hope you find rest. If you're feeling lost, I hope someone meets you at an open gate. You're not alone. Thank you for staying with me to the end. And if you're reading this late at night, take a sip of warm water, pull up the covers, and sleep early. Good things come to those who wait and who keep believing.